So we're good to go. Andrew Karlinski is a biologist with the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead. He is a man of all projects because they all do that. They are big partners with the commission. We go out and do water quality testing with them. That's great. I saw this presentation with the Codium, and Andrew did a great job. So he will tell you more about invasive Codium and what we can do about it. So take it away, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you everyone for coming. For those of you that were there on Tuesday, this might look a little familiar, but for those who weren't, my name is Andrew Karlinski. As Sherry mentioned, I'm the biologist for the Natural Resource Department of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead. And I've been with them for the last 2 years. I started in 2021 as summer help and then was lucky enough to land a year-round position with them. And as you mentioned, I've had a hand in a lot of different projects, and this project, the Codium Removal Program, is what I will be talking about today. So before we get into the program itself, let's talk about what is Codium. So Codium fragile, subspecies Tomentosoides. So there's 17 subspecies of Codium. This is the one that we have here. It ranges from the Gulf of the St. Lawrence all the way down to North Carolina. It is a macroalgae, so it is a primary producer, photosynthesis as a plant. It is found in the intertidal and subtidal zones, and it roots to hard surfaces, which we will come to discuss more in the presentation and realize that that is the root of the problem. It is resilient in a range of water conditions, as most invasive plants act. And it reproduces through stem fragmentation and zoospores. So as you see in the picture, and that tiny little branch or the tiny little stem can turn into a full mass of codium, which again we'll realize is a huge problem when dealing with it. So that's just a little background on codium itself. So when did it get here? So it first was reported off of Gardner's Bay in 1957 off Long Island Sound. It was supposedly got here through two potential ways, although one is more likely than the other. The most likely reason being it attached itself to ship hulls and from Europe, and then was transported here and broke off and established itself in the rocky shores and harbors. If you are familiar with zebra mussels, that it was a similar invasive that also arrived in North America through similar means. There's also potential for it to have reached America through European and Japanese oyster transportation. However, there were regulations in place in 1949, actually, that were there for quality control to make sure that codium wasn't growing on these oysters and it wouldn't be transported. But that's not to say there weren't some, smaller bits that were naked to the human eye that potentially were able to still grow and establish itself here in Long Island Sound. So, 1957 in Gardner's Bay. 4 years later, it started to appear and be noticed off of the South Shore of Connecticut. And then as early as 1962, it is found in Rhode Island. And then finally, it makes its way to Surf Drive Beach off of Falmouth. For those of you that have time to kill in Falmouth, if you ever take that drive, it's a very beautiful view. It finally established itself and is noticed there. So if you look at the distance between Gardner's Bay and the south side of Connecticut, and then compare that to the edge of Falmouth to Martha's Vineyard, it's safe to assume it probably within that 4 to 5 year range, it made itself established on the vineyard. And again, the vineyard, the north side of the vineyard is an incredibly rocky shoreline, so it creates that ideal habitat for codium to establish and root itself to. So now that we know what codium is, where it got here, and how it got here, we'll get into why it's a problem. And I keep mentioning how its ability to root itself to hard surfaces. That is ultimately what is leading to the issue with it in the aquaculture industry and within shellfish populations. So first off, before we get into that, it also is harming native aquatic vegetation. Eelgrass is, there's a lot of restorative efforts on place in the island that are there to take care of it. So by crowding and taking up those resources and loosening sand, because actually as these branches become oxygenated, whatever it's rooted to, whether that's rock, shell, any hard material, it will actually lift and become buoyant, and that can loosen the sand that eelgrass might be already rooted in and or growing in. So that ultimately diminishes the habitat potential for eelgrass to establish itself. And thus, by outcompeting it and starting to take place where eelgrass should be, you end up with beds of codium, where shellfish populations will then take habitat in. And that can result in a number of issues as well. So as it's able to grow over hard objects like shell, as you can see in the picture of the scallop that it's growing over, it ends up hindering its ability to function as an organism. It hinders its ability to grow. For shellfish that are able to spawn, they can't actually move and they're stuck there, and they aren't able to release anything because this codium grows over the shell itself and keeps it from being able to open up. And that ultimately leads to reduced mortality and low amounts of survival rates within the shellfish growing in codium. And so, thus, the people that go out and harvest codium, they will find that it will interfere with their aquaculture gear. So, here's a picture of a drag that is ripped up, and you can see actually some dried bits of it right on the edge of it there. So what happens is you drop your drag in, as you're dragging over scallops, all of a sudden, it fills up quickly. And then you're pulling up and you're expecting to see, all right, I found half a bushel of scallops, but you pulled this, clump of slimy, smelly mess of that is codium. And, you throw it on a culling board and, you're sifting through it, and then you end up only finding, a handful of, decent scallops. So this can and is ultimately the large problem that is affecting the aquaculture industry, and thus why the codium removal program was created. So we were brought to, so before we get into the program, it is written within Aquinnah town bylaw and other, if not all, town bylaws in the aquaculture or within the shellfish regulations, that any invasives along with, besides codium, green crab, moon snails, brittle starfish, and whelks also be removed. And that is, if it enters your boat, it is to be brought back to shore and brought substantially beyond the shoreline so that it can't be reintroduced back into the water body to continue to cause problems. So some town shellfishermen brought to the attention to town administration that the codium problem in the New Hampshire pond was becoming a very large issue, and that there was some extra help that might be needed in order to help start combating this. So the town reached out to the Natural Resources Department looking for advice and potential ideas of how to deal with this issue. And we ended up coming up with a bounty program where we would reward town residents, shell fishermen, tribal members who go out to collect scallops or go other shell fishing. For the amount of codium they remove in X amount, we would pay them for that. So with the program, we had three goals in mind, and the first goal being overall to reduce the amount of codium within Menamsha Pond. And then by rewarding those removing codium and paying them, ultimately that would offset the cost of time and resources spent dealing with codium. When you're on the water and you're sifting through on your culling board and you're spending an extra hour, 2 hours out there dealing with this stuff, you're burning gas. If you have someone out there that's also trying to make money, that ultimately costs you. So with the payment or to offset the cost of codium removal, ultimately it would benefit those going out there. And overall, with the removal of codium, that would improve the health of Menamsha Pond and allow for native species like eelgrass to restore itself and to successfully establish, which would ultimately then boost the rest of the shellfish that live within the Menamsha Pond complex and ultimately benefit the aquaculture industry. So that is the program goals. So how does the program actually work? So it's pretty straightforward. This right here is a picture of West Basin. For those of you that aren't familiar, that is what we consider the base of operation for codium removal and for township fishermen to go out, whether or not they keep their boats tied up there, or you can see where the this truck is backed in. That's a boat launch. You know, some guys will drop their boat in and take it out immediately when they're done. So we consider this base of operation. So prior to the program, we purchased, I think it was like 20 fish totes. And fish totes were the ways that or it was the best way for us to quantify how much codium was being removed. And it worked best for people going out on the water. So we would leave out the totes out on the West Basin, and then, you know, whoever would go out on the water would bring, you know, however many totes they feel like they would need. They'd go out in the water, you know, they'd drag up what they needed for scallops, whether they were going for recreational or commercial. There's a difference in the amount of bushels you can take, but as they're dragging up for scallop and going scalloping, they're finding codium. These fish totes then act as space for them to store the codium in, so that way it's also not sitting on their culling board, and they actually have more room to operate and get their scallops out. So they're out in the water for, you know, 2-3 hours, depending on how long. They fill up their totes, and then they come back to the docks and they unload the totes onto the docks. And then I come down and you'll see, so I have the bed of the truck struck level with the dock. The lowball estimate of a tote of codium, especially wet weight, is around 120 pounds per tote. I like to think that I'm a physically able human being, but I also want to preserve myself. When you're dragging up, you know, 10 to 20 totes a day sometimes, that can be a lot of physical strain. And to, you know, it's just me out there too, for the most part. So I want to make sure that I'm making it easy for myself. So what I'll do is I'll take the totes from the end of the dock and we'll drag them up and then throw them in the back of the bed as pictured here. And then I will, you know, just make note of who's brought in what. Everyone ties up in, you know, their designated areas on the dock. So I know if, you know, there's 3 totes next to this person's boat, I know it's them. Unless someone else's, then they'll usually text me. So I'm, you know, very aware of who's bringing in what. I'll make note of that. And then, so we go down to, we have a plot of land off of Old South Road that is under the tribe that we use as storage space for seasonal gear for trailers. And then we found a area within that plot of land that, you know, we weren't using, and that we found would be, you know, a decent spot to dump this codium. And as pictured there, that's some summer help that we have. He came back for spring break and decided that he wanted to spend it hauling codium, so that was pretty cool. But we know we dump it, and then we bring the totes back to West Basin, and then they're there again for future use. And then we bring the truck back, and then I'll just spray the back of the truck down with Saltex spray, which is just a soap that helps with salt corrosion, just to preserve the bed of the truck. So ultimately, that's how the program and removing works. It's not rocket science. It's literally just, you know, dragging it from the bottom of the pond up onto a boat, from the boat to the docks, dock to the truck, dump it, bring it back, and call it a day. So that's the removal process. So let's look at the results of the first year. So from 2023 to 2024 season, with the, again, lowball estimate of 120 pounds per tote, we found that with 439 total totes removed, that is just shy of 50,000 pounds of codium removed. So that's a lot of codium. Granted, there's shell and other debris in there, but it's primarily codium that is removed. That's a lot of, again, codium to be removed. So you'll notice these patterns of these up and down days where, you know, some days there's 25 plus totes being removed, and then some days, you know, it's as low as 3. And that can range, or that can be because of a range of different extraneous factors, poor weather conditions. So if it is not above 32 degrees by 10 o'clock, then in the town of Aquina, shell fishing is not permitted for that day. So, you know, weather, especially when the season is during the winter, you know, you might find some colder days that can have an effect, and that can not allow people to go out on the water. If it's not that, sometimes the wind, Menevja Pond is on the north side of the island. So if you get a strong northern gust coming in on you, that might make your time out in the water a little bit hard to work with. So Some people might not want to power through that, but again, I've seen them go out in, torrential rain and it's blowing 20. So that's not to say that some people can't tough it out. And if it isn't the weather, sometimes there's other reasons. Market price, while it wasn't an issue this year, and I'll get to it for this year, but in 2023, 2024 season, the market price, was decent enough that there was reason for these guys to go out and whether commercial or recreational, they could still go out and make their money. And again, as I pictured before in the couple slides back, boat and gear issues happen. When you're pulling this stuff up, a drag might rip. You're out in the water for a while, your engine might, go out, something happens. It is what it is. So those are some potential reasons for as to why you might have these low dates of coating removal, and then also extraneous factors. I had one gentleman that ended up pulling his shoulder out halfway through the season, so he was out of commission for a couple of weeks. But then he still was toughing out even in a cast. So that's not to say that again these guys aren't resilient. So that's the first year. So incredibly successful. Exceeded our expectations as to how much we thought would be removed. So in turn of that, the second year, we found a bit of drop in how much was removed. So it was 122 totes. And again, with that low ball estimate of 120 pounds per tote, we're looking at just over 14,600 pounds of coating removed. Again, that's still a lot. But so this year was a little bit different, and as you see, I've highlighted some different stuff as far as low coating removal. So in case none of you guys went outside from the months of January to February, it was incredibly cold, and there was a lot of days, sometimes weeks, where shellfishing wasn't permitted at all because it was always below freezing. So that didn't allow for a lot of opportunity for these guys to get out. And then again, also the scallop market value. I heard reports at one point that it was $14 a pound or somewhere around that range. And I mean, especially for some of these guys that have freezers full of scallops from last year, that they're still trying to clear that inventory and they don't have the room to go out and collect more and then freeze it again. There's not a lot of reason for these guys to go out and collect it. That's not to say though that they weren't able to be successful. As you can see this, at the end there's a little bit of an uptick, and even this is the last week for the program that I'll be running for this year, and I'm noticing that these guys are able to get out more because great conditions, great weather. So. And again, the boat gear issues, I know someone's engine just blew out in the middle of March, so they weren't able to go out for a little bit. So there's a lot of stuff that affects one's ability to go out and ultimately collect codium. But regardless, between the last 2 years, we're looking at just under 65,000 pounds of codium removed. I mean, this, like I said, exceeded our expectations as to what we thought the program would result in, and it's been incredibly successful, and very happy with the turnout. We've been able to reward these guys, and they've been able to stay afloat, which has been awesome. So now we've gone through the results of the program and we discussed codium. We have all this codium. What do we do with it? So this is where it gets a little tricky. So before we get into it, you might look up uses for codium. There's a lot of differences between farm codium versus invasive codium. You might find there's, a lot of seafood recipes or garden uses on forums, and ultimately you're not realizing that that's actually a species of codium that's farmed. I know out in Eastern Asia, there's a huge industry for farming codium. And then if you compare that to the stuff that's growing on the bottom of an Menempsea pond, there's going to be variation in, the quality of it. The quality of water in Menempsea 2 might not be, up to standards with what people are farming it in to consume it. So with that being said, though, gardening and fertilizer, from what I found, at least on, Cape and Islands gardening forums and the people I've talked to on the island, There's a lot of mixed opinions on its usage. Some say it's good, some say it's bad, some say, they don't notice an effect. I saw one post about some gentleman talking about how he threw some into his fertilizer and he put worms in after, and then had a lot of fear that the worms weren't being as productive and useful because of the nitrogen content in the codium. So I did also find though that apparently if you wash it in a salt or a cold water bath, essentially, that it'll kind of help remove that excess nitrogen or nutrients. Um, so there is potential some use there, but again, it's a lot of mixed opinions. And when we created the program, we weren't looking at means of using it. It was more just to help with the process of removing it from the bottom of an Epsom pond. Um, but so other uses for it could be biochar. I had a lady come in the beginning of the summer, and she ended up taking up about a truckload's worth of codium that had, severely broken down because at that point it had been, 2, 3 months after any of it had been pulled out of the pond. And you can kind of see on the outside layer what it kind of looks like once it's really, because this is the previous year's podium pile, and then the pile on top of it, that's the newer stuff. So when you remove it, it becomes this kind of like sludge mess, and there's still all that shell left in there. And while you can burn the shell down, it does make it a little more difficult. And also with other debris, rock in the mix, you can't just throw that in the furnace to burn it. But for those of you that don't know, also sorry, biochar is essentially taking organic material, throwing it into a superheated furnace and burning it down to a carbon-based material that can be mixed into fertilizer, soil, that kind of thing that could be used for. So with this, massive amount of organic mass, there's potential for it to be used in that fashion. However, again, it just kind of comes down to what else is mixed in there and that degree of human interaction that, you need to go in and separate it further. Um, that being said, though, also with the food situation, I was interviewed last year from a gentleman at the Times, and while we were walking along the beach, he picked up a piece of codium he found and started nibbling on it and said it was really good. So there is, some potential with edibility there. I did find a recipe for a Japanese seaweed salad with a codium base that is basically salt, pepper, red pepper flake. You soak it in soy sauce and vinegar, and then you chop up tomato and onion, and apparently that's a really good dish. I don't know if I'd necessarily try it myself, but that's not to deter anyone else if they wanted to experiment with it. Again, though, I would recommend probably washing it in that cold water bath just to, remove that excess salt, nitrogen, and just to clean it too of any debris and shell that might be in the mix. And then also there was a French dish I found from the like early 1900s that was basically a scallop and cream sauce, and then they used codium kind of ground up as a garnish for it. Um, so those are some potential uses with codium that I found in my studies. Obviously, when we get into questions, we'll talk about more too. Actually, when I had the presentation a couple days back, there was mention of potential use for it in livestock, but there's also concern for if you mix it into feed for like pigs, for instance, that ultimately, if you feed too much of it, it could end up not ruining, but affecting the quality of meat. So you might end up with a more fishy, salty pork, which I don't know if people like. Personally, I wouldn't, but again, everyone's different. So again, there's a lot of room for growth in what to do with it. The program was created originally just to remove it, but to go that extra step and, use it as a material for something else would be awesome. And that's kind of what I'll discuss here. Future changes for the program. Just utilizing the codium would be awesome. There's always people reaching out to me about taking a bucket for their garden or, for whatever, wanting to find some use for it, to which I am very open to, and I happily facilitate that and am always happy to learn more from whoever is interested in it. But beyond that, program changes, also just more scalpers going out, more shell fishermen. We operate in Aquino with about a handful of guys, and it's also a tall. Obviously, I'm not going door to door asking people, yo, are you going out scalloping? There's a lot that goes into it. Do they have a boat? Do they have the opportunity to go out? Do they have the time? People also have jobs. It's not like this is, a not viable, but it's not the most, applicable to people that this is a source of income. Um, and beyond that, what can you do as an individual? If you're walking on the shoreline and you see a little bit of it or a clump of it, huck it up in the dunes, get as far as away from the shoreline as possible, just to, not run the risk of it being reintroduced into that body of water and establishing itself any further. And talk to your town shellfish warden, constable, town administrator about codium regulations. Like I mentioned before, most, if not all towns have regulations in place for codium removal, but they might just be beyond that. Is there potential within your town to have a program similar to this? Is this something that's viable? What would need to go into it? And again, I, am more than happy to act as that resource. And for anyone that would be interested in expanding this to any other town. But yeah, just continuing that conversation within your group always goes a long way. Um, so, in conclusion, as I said a million times, but the coding removal program has been a huge success. It exceeded our expectations, and it's been great for those that have been going out and going scalloping, because they're able to actually not spend all their time just dealing with this problem, or at least they know there's some financial backing to assist them with the amount of fuel that's being burnt while they're out on the water, that kind of thing. Just continue this conversation. I'm glad, I've had the opportunity between my talk on Tuesday and, here now with the Water Alliance. I'm just, this conversation, if unfortunately this problem with codium affects all of our town body waters, whether you realize it or not. And I think sometimes people around here might just look at some things growing in the water and assume, oh, it's a plant, or, it's growing, so it must be good for the environment. But ultimately, this stuff is doing a lot of harm to native to eelgrass populations and to the aquaculture industry. So just promoting this stuff and raising awareness within your town to your town shellfish warden and constable is a huge step in the right direction. And then finally, just look out for removal opportunities. I know on August 9th, the Lagoon Pond Association is having a shoreline codium removal opportunity, to which I will be there in attendance, and that'll be a great way also for people to kind of get their hands on and see what they're dealing with and see how it affects even as close as the shoreline, whether or not it's the aquaculture industry and you're dragging for scallops 5 feet under. You might step out on the water and you're a foot in, and all of a sudden your toes feel a little gross and you're like, what am I stepping in? It's podium. So beyond that, though, just have a conversation. And yeah, so that's about all I have to say on codium so far. At this point, I assume we turn to questions, but just thank you for coming and listening about me talk about codium, and I hope that everyone's able to take away some bit of information about this, and that this conversation continues to happen for however long, the next couple months, years, whatever. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. I've got a question. Since you started the removal process in Menemsha Pond, have you noticed a reduction in the amount of codium out there?
Yes. So there was a gentleman this year actually that wasn't able to go out in the year before, and he operates in one part of the pond, and he said, there's a noticeable difference in how much he's removing, and even looking down at the bottom of the pond, he sees just a lack of it. Like, not that it was overwhelming, but like you could see these patches of green or whatever in the water, and now it's just straight sand. So even just those personal anecdotes has been awesome. And again, that's to kind of attest to the amount removed. Show here in the second one, like with the amount that was removed within the first year, and even talking to some of the guys that were going out regularly, they would talk about how they were noticing themselves even within that first year, that dent, and how they're starting to carve out a corner. It definitely, I think, is taking effect the second year, and I think that could also attribute to the low amount, which has been awesome. So yeah, it's definitely being noticed by the public, which is good.
Great, thank you. All right, anybody got any questions? Please raise your digital hand so I can see you. Actually, maybe you could take your screen your program down and we can see everybody at once here. John, I see your hand. You're muted. John, you're muted.
Unmuted.
Probably a blessing anyway. Andrew, I was saying thank you very much for the work that you're doing and for giving us this presentation.
Of course.
I've got a couple of questions, but I guess the more significant one to me is, what are people doing elsewhere? What, if anything, are people doing elsewhere? I mean, all that area to the west from where it was first reported, like what, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Are there programs there for codium removal?
There, from what I've found, it's a lot more of a similar situation with the rest of the island, where it's, there's bylaws in place, and people are aware of the issue. I haven't looked into a whole lot into other removal programs. I can't imagine there's a lot of variation into the situation. It's most likely, again, just, providing opportunity for people that go out to harvest it and, remove it and then bring it inland, whatever. We had talked about the potential for a more mass removal situation, but that also can in turn have a large effect on the rest of the pond bottom. So we found, actually we have a coinciding study in August of 2023 with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where they did some transects along Menemsha Pond, more for eelgrass surveys, but they found a mix. There are a couple areas where there's eelgrass and codium, mixing together. If you're going to start going out and dredging up the bottom of the pond, that's going to have a large effect on everything within the ecosystem, all the shellfish that are in there, your native species. So it's kind of a delicate situation where, you can't just unfortunately do a blanket, removal. There you kind of have to go in peace and make sure, you're protecting and looking out for other things. But yeah, again, like I said, there's, regulations in place, but I haven't found anything, extensive in the codium removal.
Right.
I hope that answered your question also.
Anybody else? John, got another one?
Yep. Yeah, thanks. With respect to your points, Andrew, about how, and you noted, and I understand it a number of times, that the program was set up to remove the stuff, not to find an end use for it. But just given the possibility that if demand for whatever reasons occurred, whether for food or for fertilizer, that could help foster interest and increase the efforts that might be made for it if people see there's something in it for them. I was wondering whether there might be some use in publicizing the issue, maybe with some, say, for example, the garden club, or otherwise, to, for example, have people choose, or farmers to do experiments with the stuff to see how much, if any amount, you use under what circumstances or conditions could be good. Similarly with the incredible chefs and even Island Grown Initiative or other things here for end use as food, to set up some kind of competition or something that would draw interest in it and make it fun for people to look into it, and that would increase awareness.
No, yeah, I totally get your point. Like I said, the program originally was created just to help with the removal process, and all the extra utilization of it kind of came after the fact. So not unfortunately, but the focus hasn't necessarily been there. Not to say that people aren't reaching out to me. Anytime someone reaches out to me, whether I spoke to Amy, I'm blanking on her, Higgins, which she does the garden column on the IMB Times, just trying to promote some stuff of like, hey, is this a viable resource? I'd love to have those conversations. Again, it just kind of, I'm not a big gardener. I don't necessarily have, the knowledge and experience that goes in the kind of stuff. So for those that might be a bit more established in that field, again, I'd love to help out in any way I can. would, if I have to go, door to door and, start knocking and be like, hey, will you take some codium or you want to grow tomatoes? I'd love to facilitate that. It's just a little difficult, just more so focusing on the program itself and then trying to go on the extra part of removing it. Because it's also, again, I'm not just the codium person. We have a bunch of other projects we deal with in the tribe. So sometimes my focus isn't always able to pertain just to it. But I would be very happy for if someone wanted to take some for a seaweed salad or any of the restaurants. There's plenty of opportunity there. We have enough of it, so. And
Emma, I see a hand.
There we go. Thanks. I'm sorry, and I missed the Codium talk the other day. And so but I heard that was wonderful too. I had a couple. One of my questions was, have you done any dry weights? Did you take any and dry it and weigh it or anything?
No, we haven't done dry weights just because we're not we get it in the totes and then I just remove it and that's
that wasn't your focus. Just wasn't your focus.
Again, that's sorry. I'm gonna keep saying that, but that wasn't the focus. Again, we could do it if we wanted to, but it was more just we get it in the totes after I emptied out. I'm not gonna go back out and shovel all that stuff. Plus also the stuff within a week, if there's no rain or anything on it, it dries out incredibly quickly. And then as you can kind of see in the picture that's up right now, a lot of it becomes just shell. And then even her name was Maggie, when she came for the Biotron this summer, this stuff a couple months in, we were digging into it, it just became sludge. It became nasty. So rather than make this disgusting mess just to figure out a dry weight, I mean, are you saying for the purpose of
because I mean, I'm looking at the codium on the beach and I'm at the lobster hatchery, and yeah, I've played with enough codium. I've taken it off the beach. I've put it on my asparagus. I haven't done experiments with it yet. And if you're not careful, it just turns to slime and sludge because there's too much nitrogen and not enough aeration and all that stuff. Anyone who composts knows that sludge deal. But because there has been research on the amount of nitrogen in codium, and I haven't looked into enough to know how much it varies from pond to pond across the season. But that's something that, as people are, I was talking to Sherry Countryman more about codium, and this is the direction we're going to go in is then, so I'm going to be taking just a little piece, weighing it wet, drying it, weighing it again. So then when you say, oh, there was 15,000 pounds of wet stuff, I can say, okay, well, this is how much dry stuff there is, because any of the literature that says, oh, it's 1, 2, 4% nitrogen, I don't know, is going to be based on dry weight. So we'll collect that, and then there's an opportunity to extrapolate based on your wet numbers how much nitrogen may have been taken out. Okay. Of course, without knowing how many rocks. A dead old scallop shell doesn't weigh a lot. A rock weighs a lot, so all those compounding factors. But and I was just gonna say it because I'm having this conversation with about green crabs, and then people where oh, they're a nuisance, let's get them out. And I studied the Phragmites thing, so I'm all in for all this cool stuff. But as we do that, we have to make sure that if we're promoting something as a food, that it is treated like a food. These things, there aren't regulations around them because they're invasive species and no one actually eats them. But if we want to eat them, and I'm all for it, we have to remember to treat it as food. So it means not leaving it in a big nasty pile for even a couple of hours. So that's just a message to make sure that gets out to everybody, so that we don't end up with people who are super excited about this, but go out and grab something nasty off of the high tide line and try to eat it, and we have some sort of health issue. That would be bad for all of us.
That's fair. I would not want that. So, to get back to your point about the nitrogen removal, whatever data we can provide with that. I mean, also, as you see the picture too, they're also, I know you say one shell isn't a lot, but when all that shell piles up, I don't know to what percentage that, I'm sure we could figure out, ways whether or not it's just a surface area measurement, that kind of thing, or you just take a sector of it. But no, that would be awesome too, because the nitrogen removal did get brought up, and especially Phragmites. in the other meeting. You know, I would be happy to provide that information, be happy to figure out how the extraneous data that's coming along with this removal. And you know, whatever we can provide on our end for you, you know, don't be afraid to reach out.
I see Marina Lent is on the call. Maybe she's got some thoughts on Board of Health, how they might think about this and regulations.
Hang on, let me get myself unplugged here.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if we started looking into food uses, we would really have to delve into commercial harvest practices, and what Emma raised is slightly different. It's sort of encouraging people to be creative in their own personal space and time and kitchen. That's the first step. And also very, very valid point there, to be for people to be aware of food quality versus eating off the beach.
Right.
It's like if you're going to eat roadkill, you want to know about the intestinal system. You want to know, you want a head injury. You don't want, you know, intestines spread across the tarmac and all the muscle meat spoiled. That said, I think it's a very interesting challenge for some creative chef who would have to guide, you know, that a chef has the advantage of being schooled in food safety, and it would be obviously a completely private, non-commercial experiment. But how cool would it be to have a chef direct how this stuff is harvested and then take it immediately upon arrival and try and make something with it? But that is completely different from a commercial operation. And that would be pretty elaborate, but obviously there's already commercial harvesting going on and seaweed products. And it's one of the, you know, got to get creative about things as we may need to look towards other food sources in case there's large scale crop failures.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. It's not super precise and helpful, but I think it is important what Emma's warning about not having people get sick by experimenting
Yeah.
without some knowledge is really, we should not encourage people to do that because it would set us all back. That's always been the thing with local food. If we mess it up, it sets us all back.
Okay.
I mean, I was taught how to eat like sweetmeats off the beach when I was little, and so I taught my kid. But then and now my kid's teaching other kids. But the piece that he missed with one of his friends is the fine parts of where to collect those sweetmeats to make sure they're out of the water and what color they should be and how they should feel and look before you eat it. So it's, you know, those of us who like to forage and eat weird stuff, it's like it's kind of a folk, it almost, I mean, yes, there's like food regulations. And then there's like, just like the folky knowledge of like how to know what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess mushrooms is the extreme example, but it
Yeah.
is a great example. You know.
Yeah.
I guess also for if we were to do a more, because also all this stuff is being dragged up with scallop drags. So again, it's getting, you know, mixed in with whatever is also at the bottom of the pond. So you know, that also might not be the most ideal for consumption, even if you are washing it. I guess at that point, you probably have to mimic you know, certain commercial practices and you know, takes either like, even if it looks great, if it's still sitting at the bottom of the pond, there's no guarantee that it might be safe for you. So whether that's a separate experiment of you know, taking some stems and then, you know, essentially sort of like an oyster cage or something like that, and just growing it within a more controlled area on like the more surface side of the water just so it's also easily accessible, and you can also, keep an eye on it every day and make sure, take it out, wash it out, that kind of thing, just to make sure, you're not getting other nasty stuff in the mix with it.
There's a certain time of year, and it all blurs together to me at this moment. But a certain point in the summer where you see really pretty bright green growing tips. And
So
so obviously like like any other
yeah,
critter, there's like periods of growth. And so that's when it like looks yummy. And it's not foul, it's not funky.
I forget because it's a range. Because unfortunately, also with this species, there's not a whole lot of research beyond like the introduction of it. There's a lot more focus again on the commercial stuff just because there's more money in it. But it ranges. I've got to look it up, but there's a certain. It's either the winter. I think it's the winter is when it'll start to stem and grow, and then there's periods in the summer where it can also blossom. I mean, it is also macroalgae, so it's going to benefit a whole lot better with quality in water, more sunlight, more oxygen within the water. So, figuring out that time frame too of, when would be the best time to grow it, is also, I guess, important in that matter.
Sherry, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, Andrew, again. I listened to his talk the other day too, so I came here for the comments, as they say. Um, but I did a little research after the talk the other day, and you're right. From what I can tell, and there's not a ton of research on it, but it looks like it's a nitrogen fixer, but there's more nitrogen in it in the winter time than there is in the summertime. So, if you were to try to want to remove it, it looks like, as far as I could tell, that it's actually better to remove it in the winter than it is in the summer, which I thought was really interesting. But then there are these periods of time where it has this growth, and then you wonder, like, what would it be like that? So anyway, I'm going to talk to Emma and Allie at the Shellfish Group about maybe trying to get some testing done, if we can do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and if you'd want to compare, I mean, I guess that's great news also just because we're doing this already in the winter, but if you'd want to compare, summer growth versus winter growth and the nitrogen content within that, like I said, we have plenty of this stuff. I can, if there's a way of preserving it better, just so it's not going to be as nasty and you're not going to lose the, total amount of nitrogen in there too, I could look into that and, provide you guys with that information.
Awesome.
That's true of a lot of stuff. You don't want to harvest it when the water's warm, just in the colder times.
Yeah.
My sense is if you're looking for commercial use or for additional use of it, you're better off going the compost route than the food route, just because of the complexity, both of like the harvesting that you're talking about and the quality, etc. It is intriguing if it has this high nitrogen content. How would you take advantage of that? And who knows who has that kind of knowledge? It's sort of a biochemistry kind of thing. And can you take the slime and make an extract and whatever? I don't know. But that seems to me like a faster results, even though in terms of real money, a luxury yummy product would be great. But I think that's pretty far away and not closely enough related to the situation we find ourselves in of getting it out of the water this way.
Yeah. And also the biochar, Maggie, we talked a little bit because she was there on Tuesday, about, and she was hoping to, get to burn it, within the coming weeks. That also would be, and I know that kind of tends to be a blanket solution for most organic material. But again, at least there is some viability and at least there is some use because the product of biocharring is a lot more usable versus just straight up mixing this in with your fertilizer. So
some of the oyster farmers, don't they grow some seaweed? And what kind of seaweed is that?
Cottage City has grown some kelp. I don't know if they're growing it currently, but as an invasive species, I mean, again, I don't know what the regulations are, but so when we talk about Phragmites, like you're not allowed to help
Right.
it along, or even if you have a good use for it. So as an invasive species, I don't think that you would like encourage someone to grow the codium.
Yeah.
Right, that was my question. It had to be strictly regulated, so it couldn't escape.
Yeah.
It also, I mean, if we're like, there's already so much of it out there, and that's kind of what I talked about too, the difference between farmed versus invasive codium. You know, again, as much as we want to apply the farmed codium, you know, applications towards this stuff, it might not have that same, you know, applicability. There might be, you know, like we said, the nitrogen content within it, just what it's growing in, the water quality of it, even the species itself, the cellular structure, all that stuff that goes into it. You know, there might be the smallest stuff that could just result in it not being as viable of a product as the intentionally farmed species.
I've got a basic question, Andrew, and I might have just missed this. The days on which you are collaborating with the shell fishermen for the removal, is this do you fix a particular date where you're there and they should then show up, or is it ad lib? Do
It's
they
ad
do it
lib.
as the opportunity allows?
I'm here Monday through Friday. You know, all these guys have my number. They know me. I also like, you know, the lab looks right across from Hampshire Pond, so I can see when I first come in the morning who's out, and you know, be like, all right, there's, you know, 2 guys out, so I'm expecting a little bit more. In 2023, 24, I mean, these guys would direct. Now we've got more on the system. In the beginning, they would call me directly and be like, hey, I'm coming in right now. Can you come collect it? So just yeah, we've got it down to a science at this point. There might be some days also where, like, you know, someone goes out recreationally and they just bring one tote. I'm not necessarily gonna, you know, go out and get just one tote. I might wait until the next day when there's more out there and it's more worth my time. And also, you know, it's not like we're shy of other stuff happening up here, so I might not just have the time myself to get to it.
Can I ask how you compensate these guys for this?
We're paying $10 a tote. We dropped it. It was $20 a tote the first year, and then we dropped it to 10 just for the financial aspect of it. It's funded through Bureau of Indian Affairs Invasive Species Act. So within the first year, when we paid you know, 20 a tote, we ended up spending, I think it was like just shy of 8,300 between everyone that we rewarded it to. So to ensure funding for the future of the program, we cut it down. And this year we're looking, based off the math, it's about 1,200, 1,400 spent. So, and that also, you know, that doesn't include all the fish toad stuff. You know, we're lucky as a tribe also do have a lot of overlapping projects that kind of require the same materials. So like, I'm not, you know, the Saltex soap that I'm buying in bulk, that's not something that's coming out of our fund. We use that for just general maintenance, that kind of stuff. So again, the funding of it kind of gets a little mixed up, but primarily it's mostly just the payment to the individuals themselves.
Okay, and nobody would probably go out there and just do this for the sake of collecting this stuff versus
No, I mean, we always joke about it, you know, if people are ever on the beach and they'll pull like, hey, this is codium. We're like, yeah, if you have a fish tow, you know, keep piling up and bring it down to Quinto one day and, you know, I could pay it. But you know, it's not like, I don't think if you're substantially walking back and forth along the shoreline, you're going to find enough of it to, you know, fill a tow. It's mostly.
No, I was thinking of going out in a boat, you know.
Oh, yeah, no, but also then again, it's not, the program isn't there to, you know, reward people for targeting. It's not supposed to target. This is supposed to offset what you're already bringing in and required to bring in. So, yeah.
So it's not adding extra pollution to the ponds.
No, exactly. Yeah, no.
Anybody else? Oh, John.
I wondered if anybody, you know, for example, Sherry, MVC, Sherry Casso, and Emma or others have already, you know, well-known list of potential candidates other than Menemsha Pond, you know, for where an analogous program might be useful or more easily established.
Well, Sherry Countryman said, and Andrew mentioned in August that Lagoon Pond is going to be doing a collection for it. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. Maybe the different ponds groups will want to pick it up. Did that answer your question?
Well, you named one place, so yes, partially,
Right.
thanks. I guess, I
Yeah.
mean, is Codium, is the pervasiveness of Codium similar in ponds other than Menemsha Pond? I mean, is it
Lagoon and
there an
Century.
analogous amount,
It-
density?
it's present everywhere. I haven't really seen a lot of it in James Pond, which it's amazing.
Well, James
But
Pond
also-
probably has lower salinity.
Yes,
That
that is
doesn't
true.
Get much salt.
Also, there might not much be a lot of opportunity for it to establish itself in there if they're like maybe if the cut's open, but also it more so came likely than on the north side. So if it's, you know, away from that and it hasn't been introduced, then it's probably not going to.
I think that it's everywhere if the salinity is right, but it's also just not always. I mean, I think that they're really concerned about a Menemsha Pond because it was interfering with potentially with eelgrass, and that could be a problem in Central Kentucky. Central Kentucky doesn't really have any eelgrass right now, like very, very little, but maybe that's partially, maybe could blame some of that on the codium. Like, we don't really know. And the other thing, like so many other things in nature, these things go in swings. So, you know, it's always possible, it's never going to go away, but it's possible that in 5 years, we're not having massive amounts wash up on the shore, for example. It can just change with the climate in weird ways.
And also, I mean, if there's, you know, a continued amount, you know, the first year, like I said, was a lot of more than what was pulled in this year. But if we find, you know, next year that it's also kind of that steady amount and we start, you know, and we just keep up with it, ultimately you'll just kind of keep it at a much lower, like you said, it's not gonna just straight up disappear. I don't think the chances of removing something that's, you know, as invasive and has been established for so long is you know, reasonable, but to get it down to low enough a number where, you know, eelgrass can then start outcompeting it and establish itself more and kind of corner it. You know, you might see a good steady decline in the total amount.
I'm a large mammal terrestrial biologist, so this is I have a certain amount of decades dealing with freshwater, but from dealing with that, I'm aware of milfoil, and I think I'm right in recollecting that I've seen the notion that if one removes milfoil, then one is removing something that is utilizing the excess nutrients. And in the case of freshwater, of course, it's mostly phosphorus. And I just wondered when you're removing this substantial consumer of nitrogen, then if the nitrogen levels remain the same, are there then other sorts of consequences with other sorts of things utilizing it to grow? And if there's any monitoring or awareness of that, or do I have the wrong end of the stick on this?
No, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, nitrogen, obviously you know, we also have our water quality sampling within an Epsilon, so we're monitoring for nitrogen, as is anyway. We're doing that with commission as well. You know, if we find out that, I mean, also then to again reiterate, we didn't introduce this program to reduce the amount of nitrogen. That's also a huge benefit if we're coming to find out that it is assisting with that. If it's not, you know, that's unfortunate for the aspect of nitrogen, but again, we're still just focusing on the removal of this species itself.
I just for the record, as it were, I understand that. And when I've asked you questions, Andrew, by the way, I'm not asking it with the assumption that, you know, you would be taking this on yourself.
No,
It should have been part of your program.
I just want
or
to say
anything
that
like
out loud.
Yeah. Does
No,
anyone else have a response to my perhaps somewhat incomplete notion of that? Doesn't this mean that there's still a lot of nitrogen there, but it's not being consumed in this case by codium?
Yeah,
what?
Yes, I would say that that's something. I mean, it's super interesting. It definitely happens sometimes. There is a space in Chilmark Pond where a number of years ago, someone called me and there was this really interesting, like really big green algae bloom. Like, and from my memory, it was like an ulva. It was like a sea lettuce, like a macroalgae, a seaweed. And it was this really small, very specific space. And on to either side, it wasn't there. And come to find out, like, this is where there used to be a bunch of Phragmites, and they successfully got rid of the Phragmites. And so I'm just guessing that there's freshwater seepage coming in here that's carrying in nitrogen from the groundwater, and that's why the frag loved it there. And now that the frag's not there to suck it up, the macroalgae is there to suck it up. So you can't really predict that. But and the other interesting thing that I've heard, I don't know much about, is that Codium has nitrogen fixing nodules on it. So it's also fixing its own nitrogen out of the nitrogen gas that's dissolved in the water. Like similar to the way like a legume does, I guess, but I'm sure it's slightly different mechanism. But I think that you can't really, yes, there might be excess nitrogen now that's available for something else, for a different seaweed, macroalgae, microalgae, like something. But if you're also taking that Codium out, that it also has a nitrogen content. So, hopefully you're actually doing something good in terms of the nitrogen cycle. That's my response.
Sherry, you got your hand up.
Yeah, and I think it is really interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, and so that's really cool. I am also not a scientist. I don't know anything, in that regard. But what I would say is the theory in taking the Codium out is that you allow for more space for the eelgrass to come back in. So to the extent that you can get the eelgrass to come in, then, that's what you're hoping is taking the place of the Codium that you're taking out.
And the testing for nitrogen content will be huge, just to see how much is actually in there. I know when Emma tested the algae that we took out of Mud Creek, per capita, it was not a lot of reduction in nitrogen for the amount of work that we had put into it. So. Are there any more questions? I have 2 questions for Andrew. How many people showed up at the beach grass planting, and how did that go?
It was 31 to 32 come, which was nice actually, because considering what the weather report was saying the day before, we didn't think we were going to get anyone. It was blowing 20 right off the north. We're on Lobsterville. I mean, it was pretty brutal, but I think everyone was more so worried about the rain. But because the rain held off, we kind of had this steady amount of people showing up each hour or so, and it kind of just kept this consistent level of work. So between the staff and then that, it was around 40-ish people that were there. And we got it done before noon, which is when we say 9 to 12, and we were done by 11:50, which was awesome. We got all 20,000 stems in the ground. That's about, I haven't done the exact calculations, but it's estimated to be 10,000 square feet of beachgrass planted. It's still there, it's good. We Quitza Cuisine fed us, so that was great too. People got a nice hot drink and burrito. So it was an overall huge success. And yeah. And I'm sorry I don't have the photos. They're actually, the Times and the Gazette both did a couple things. The Gazette has a lot more photos on it, so if you find the article, I'd recommend looking at that. It's pictures of people planting grass. So I don't know if it's super interesting, but it's still fun to look at.
Yeah, those are nice. I saw them in the paper today online. And the herring, are they coming back?
We just broke 1,000. We are on record to it's not looking great. At the rate that, or in years past, were lower than we were in 2017, which was what we considered the drought year. So, but it's April 17th, so we still have till the end of May where you'll probably see those larger couple nights where you get those couple hundred, hopefully 1,000 coming in. But at the rate we're going at, it does not look super amazing. So we're just gonna continue monitoring and hope for the best.
And do you have the camera set up in the herring run on Lagoon?
Yes. Yeah, that's linked. Actually, that's on our website. That's also on our social media. Those are all linked there. Again, I would recommend looking at night, because with the way the sun hits the reflective back piece in the daytime, it can make it a little bit blurry. We had people commenting on it last year all from Nantucket too, interestingly, that were like complaining. We're like, oh, we can't see and it looks crap, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, well, if you come at night, you can see very clearly and you can actually watch the herring go through because we have a night run. So we saw a muskrat go through, we have our otters, cormorants love just hanging out in there. So if you past sunset, check it out. They usually start to roll around 9 to 11-ish. You might see a couple depending on the tidal structure and the numbers before and after. But yeah, so it's going.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me and let me give my spiel again about Codium. I'm glad and others that weren't able to make it on Tuesday we were able to see it. So I'm glad this conversation is happening, and I'm glad it's also it's getting brought and tied into the nitrogen aspect too, because I know Sherry had mentioned that on Tuesday about references to the Phragmites too, but there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about it. So I'm glad that there's potential for it to also inadvertently affect that part of preserving our ponds and making sure we have good water quality.
Yep. Well, thank you for your work. Does anybody else have any other things they want to talk about or things that have happened the last month as far as the ponds go?
Sheriff's Meadow has opened up the trails for Squibnaucket for the property that they bought, Sheriff's Meadow and Land Bank. Those are open now. So if
Great.
anybody's interested, Saturday is our beach cleanup for Earth Day.
That's right.
The big event at the museum. Tuesday is Earth Day, so there's going to be a lot of really good presentations at the museum on Saturday too. I know Liz is going to be there with climate change. Sherry Countryman is going to be there with Lagoon Pond Association, so it should be pretty fun and interesting. And I'll be there serving food, helping out Signy. So
Hey,
We're
we're going to have a urine diversion toilet up there. So if you haven't seen one, come on up and take a peek.
That's a good idea.
Yep.
it's just for visual, no actual demonstrations. Just
I'm hoping nobody demonstrates.
so yes, Lagoon Pond Association has their own urine diverting toilet, so it will be on display at many places. It's great.
Good. It's good to make people aware of this.
Yeah. And we are trying to become part of the program for the urine diversion pilot program so that they can get the testing in and get it going. It's still going to be a few years before it passes DEP, but as many systems we can get in for the pilot program, the sooner it'll happen. And we're really counting on it.
Yep.
So, okay. Anything else, Richard? Do you want to? Anybody else?
Nope, I don't see anybody else. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful day. And Andrew, thank you for your work. It sounds like you're doing a great job up there.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for coming.
Okay. Have a good day.
All right. See you later.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.